2020 was an awesome year. Oh man, that was an great year, I gotta say. I mean, the movies that they show, I went to visit my parents, not many people go out in the streets. Man, guys, let me tell you, 2020 is probably one of the best years that I ever had. Okay, I know that, I know about that. But you know what? Well, I know 2020, despite all these things, it wasn't exactly very bad to me. Um, but I'm saying that because this year I had kind of like the chance to revisit my parents, and while they're doing good, this kind of leave out some kind of happy mark on me. So I don't want to be kind of like really pessimistic on this year. But but if there's something that I have to kind of not be very positive about it, is that this year, because of the whole thing that happened, I didn't get the chance to watch so many movies that planned. Mostly because I had to, reserve some things. I had to. There were some, well, some personal issues that I had to take, and of course, because most of the movies that we were supposed to have this year, they have been delayed for next year. So I gotta say that this year of my top 10 best movies, best movies is. It's not gonna be kind of like, this is kind of like a big mainstream movies, because honestly, I didn't see enough great movies in order to compile a very reasonable top 10 like usual. But it's mostly because I do have kind of like a personal preference in one genre to another. So basically, this list is gonna be a little bit more siding, kind of like in the animation or some horror, kind of like a little bit more of kind of like my side of movies. Another big difference that I'm gonna have with this list is that well, I normally steer clear of Netflix or movies that came out via streaming. Considering the situation that happened, I decided that this year is gonna be an exception. So basically, it's time to look up at least some of the few positives that I've seen, at least on movie making. And like always, I compiled the list. And honestly, there were very few good movies that I just saw this year that there is no honorary mention. Surprising. Because look at this. Well, without revealing a lot. Basically what I do most of the time is that I put on a list all the movies that I have seen, whether it be in a movie theater or in streaming in this year, and I scratch down when I compiled them, and there were so few of the ones that I absolutely loved that, man, it's gonna be kind of like, it kind of felt like I'm a very pessimistic guy. But no, I haven't seen good enough movies this year. And I'm sounding like a broken record. So how about if we get to the point and let's start out. The top 10 best movies of 2020. And just in case, this is all personal opinions, I'm gonna give out kind of like a small reminiscent if this movie holds up during the old year, but it's far enough. Let's go on with the list. So let's start it out. My number 10 for best movie of the year is Enter the Fat Dragon. Normally this movie wouldn't be in any top 10. And considering kind of like my stand on the Chinese market on movie making, there are a few times that I can do an exception. Like again, it's not that I dislike China or Chinese filmmaking. It's a little bit kind of like exaggerated market. And this movie, well, it's not kind of like a grand spectacle. I remember that I had a lot of fun watching this guy, who you kind of take pity on some guy who was doing the right thing, but basically just being shunned and then demoted for basically again doing the right thing, even though it caused a lot of property damage. And then because of his sorrows, he binge eats and he becomes fat. And mostly the whole film, while being a murder mystery, is kind of have a lot of comedic tones. Some of the jokes are hit or miss. Still, you kind of like the character because he's been treated really poorly, especially with this overly racist Japanese detective. But you know that this detective is kind of like the worst guy ever. Oh man! But the biggest thing that I have in my mind with this movie is that for a fat guy, they kind of make the choreography make him look like he didn't lose his fitness. He moves like a professional martial artist despite his muscle volume. Oh man! But overall, I did have a little bit of a fun film, and that's technically enough for me for at least make it for number 10 for the few movies that I liked this year. My number 1 is the first animated film of many that you're gonna see in this list, and it's a Pixar movie. So we're moving onwards. Yep, my number 9 is Onwards. And if it wasn't for there was a small list of good movies that I've seen this year, I bet that if I could have seen more, this wouldn't be on the list, because there's some things that I did appreciate what the movie had, but there are some aspects that kills it. The first thing that kill off the movie is basically, although it's not entirely the fault of Onwards, but let's say that this is the film that managed to finally put the final nail on the coffin on every single respect that I had with The Simpsons. Because this one came out and it had that Maggie short that was awful. I hated that Maggie short so much that it really showed that how much Fox became a sellout, selling their souls to Disney, and was shoehorning in with in this short. That was basically the final what killed off The Simpsons for me. So much that I even this year skipped out the annual Treehouse of Horror. And by the way, I know what it was. I hated what they did. I didn't see it, but I read it. But anyway, back to Onwards. I like the idea. I like the idea about having kind of like this magical creatures world that basically they just ditch the magic in order to go more scientific, which in ways it kind of feels like it was gonna go into the what was it, the Good Dinosaur territory, but luckily it didn't, because the problem with the Good Dinosaur is that they marketed saying that, well, what will happen if the comet didn't destroy the dinosaurs, and it didn't feel important to the movie overall. But this one, actually, the magic is like, what if magic was ditched and now they use technology and there's magical creatures in a techno world? And this one, the part of the magic, it does have some center on it. Although yeah, it doesn't feel like one of those big heartwarming Pixar films. It mostly feels like a usual Disney comedy film. Although you do buy the relationship of our main cast, you know, the brother who wants to see his father, but that he never sees, and also there is the brother who is basically kind of like this, is basically doing his Chris Pratt practices. And of course they kind of turn into a kind of like a road trip with siblings, which is endearing considering that I do have a brother. But one thing that actually kills off for me the ending is I kind of blurted out, is the ending, of course. The ending is the one that I personally don't like. Without revealing so much, I found that ending that, well, I get the idea what they wanted to do to put out some closure. I found it unfair, and it's in a kind of borderline, kind of cruel in a way. So honestly, what was up with that ending? That was so unfair. Although yeah, it shows that life can be unfair, but the way it was handled, it kind of gave out kind of like a bad taste in my mouth. Although it wasn't as bad tasted like the Maggie Simpson short, but still it was a nice movie, enough to make it on my list. Continuing on. Number 8, another movie that I think it shouldn't belong on a top 10, but because of limitations, you know what? It's The Croods, A New Age. I love the first Croods, but this one felt more like a comedy first than heart. You can tell that it kind of went a little bit astray to becoming your run-of-the-mill DreamWorks film. It has the comedy, it has the cultural references here and there. Although I'm not gonna deny that the last one had it, but it kind of stayed in place. This is why I still love How to Train Your Dragon, because that one kind of restrains a little bit from that. But anyway, in this one, one thing that I forgot to mention on my review is that it's funny how it started out strong with by showing us the past of Guy, and then until he, of course, meet the Croods. They're a likable bunch of cavemen. Of course, one of them being Nicolas Cage. And then they meet this modern family of cavemen hippies, in which, of course, they live in this paradise, and they kind of become kind of like the odd family couple. One civilized and the other not. They technically don't like each other, but of course, situation happens because one guy forgets to tell them why you should not touch the bananas. Okay, this is kind of like the weakest part of the movie, because whenever you said no, tell them why. But either way, the gags are funny. I like the punching monkeys are hilarious. A little bit they come up with some modern humor, but it didn't kill off so much the movie. It needed a bit more focus, and it didn't felt more like a kind of like a heartfelt film like the last one. But it was enough for me to have a good time. Also because it was the first movie I saw ever since my return from Ecuador. So let's say that it was kind of like a breath of fresh air to see a very fun movie in a movie theater after a long time. Alrighty then, what's my number 7 on the list? My number 7 best movie of the year is... oh, it's another Pixar movie, the other one. I'm talking about Soul. Soul, that was another one of those movies that I wish I could have seen it on the big screen, because watching it on the little screen, well, technically my computer, is it doesn't, you don't feel, you know, the magic, the world and everything. Mostly because when you're watching on a computer, you could get easily distracted. But regarding that, this Soul may not be my personal favorite Disney Pixar film, but I gotta give it credit for what it was trying to do. It was trying to make a movie about existentialism. It wants to, which for people saying that it's not a subject for children or something like that. I highly disagree, because this is a subject that should be for everyone and in all ages. My favorite artist, Osamu Tezuka, he touched a lot of existentialism a lot on his works. Maybe you're not gonna notice it in some of his most commercial successes like Astro Boy or Kim of the White Lion, but it's there. Actually read the Kim of the White Lion manga, and you're gonna notice that there is some semblance of existentialism. And I think that Osamu Tezuka does it better on the subject, because not only he touches about that, well, life is doing everything that you do, is about enjoying life, about you know, the food that you eat, the things that you see, the things that you touch, which basically is the point that Soul tries to make. Osamu Tezuka, he actually goes kind of like a step further, in which it kind of shows off also that life is also how do we come to terms with pain, sadness, even death, and even shows that life can be unfair. But for the benefit of the doubt, at least on Disney Pixar, they don't want to go too melodramatic in case of these kind of films. They wanted to show you that, yeah, sometimes you live kind of like a non-exciting life, like for example, like your main character Joe, in which he tries to find kind of like his big break because he feels unfulfilled, and then of course many people kind of complain saying that, well, the guy just died because he falls down an open manhole. Which, whenever I think about it, I think that, you know what? Who's the asshole who left that sewer hole open? I mean, this is truth to be told, that's actually a real life hazard, and honestly, people can get heavily. Can be heavily punished if sewer workers left this thing open in public. I mean, now that I think about it, the guy also almost wanted to kill him in a few moments of the movie. This is like something that it should be talked a lot about it. So, but there's some things that I appreciated. I appreciate what they were trying to do without being, touching the death subject so much, but it did touch about obsessions, about people that feel that they get too depressed or too obsessed on what they want to do. The character of 22, it can take a while to warm up because it starts out annoying. I was fearing that it was gonna go into Vanellope territory, but luckily it didn't. Although it was kind of weird that for a movie that was supposed to be thought-provoking, then we have this Freaky Fridays like second act in which it has some interesting terms. Even though my favorite part of the movie is basically when they drop kind of that stick in order to have this conversation between Joe and the mother. The art is actually is actually good, what you expect from a Pixar film. I like the jazzy tone. I like the kind of like these guide spirits that are kind of like lines that make me remember all the old Disney art styles. But in some ways, Some of the themes also and the art style kind of remind me of that PlayStation video game that came out called Dreams, which it also take on the subject of jazz, but that one is mostly about a guy who has some regrets about having a fallout with his jazz team. But anyway, I haven't been going too long about Soul. Let's continue on. Because my number 6, ooh, this is gonna be a bit controversial. My number 6, don't hate me for this, is The Hunt. Whew. I consider myself neutral on when it's in the political aspect. And boy, that this movie is. It was so controversial that it was supposed to come out on 2019. But because it was like, oh my god, it's about a movie about liberals shooting conservatives. You know how, but people didn't understand that this is something called political satire. Satire is an art that's been from years, ever since Greeks. So I wasn't faced about a movie that technically put liberals as the bad guys, because we've seen a lot of these in which usually it's the conservative, rich entrepreneur guy, or sometimes the Republican, who are always kind of look as the evil entity, and then we have the hero, who is technically the free-spirited guy. And well, this one kind of switches the roles, and which kind of shows that they're not so different one and the other. I mean, because the villains is shown to be these super hyper liberals, but mostly, and sorry to say, they're kind of like this rich people who are so blind, who they think that they are superior in intelligence, free speech, that they feel like that the world owes them, and but with little disregard that even people who are kind of like conservatives, they also are technically human beings. But basically, it's kind of like it's mostly a parody of that combined with The Most Dangerous Games. But honestly, they show almost no likable characters. Not even in the liberal side, and not even the victims are technically likable. They're all kind of like assholes too. But there is one hero, of course, which is the main protagonist. The main protagonist, this woman, who is a woman from Mississippi. I forgot the name of the actress, just in case. She basically, it kind of comes off as kind of like this. Not only the person who is kind of feels ready for this deadly situation, but all the kind of like the conservative quips that she says, she comes out as coming as the smartest person there is and the most likable of them all. And boy that you just follow her, even though she kind of acts like that, the badass character that doesn't give out a shit of you know what, I don't care if you live or die, you're on your own. I mean, you can't side with even people that are technically all assholes. The one that comes into my mind a lot is this conspiracy theories podcast, which for some reason he kind of looks like Gerard, the completionist. I don't know why, but he comes up as a dick, and you're supposed to care for him because he's one of the victims. But by the way, yeah, this movie is gory. It's gory. It has some political quotes, even for the fun of it. It's ridiculous as hell, but I can't deny that I had a lot of fun. Sometimes a controversial film, it makes you feel bad, but it's kind of like a high recommendation. Even you're gonna hate me for this. Oh, and by the way, yes, there are some George Orwell Animal Farm homages in this film. Time for my number 5 on the list. My number 5 is... sorry about that. The Willoughbys. This is kind of like the first movie that I saw on Netflix after after the pandemic strikes out. Okay then, my number 5 on the list is the Willoughbys. There's not much I have to say about the Willoughbys except that it was a fun film. Although watching it on Netflix, it still made me think that I wish I could have seen this film on the big screen. Considering that the animation is really stylish, I kind of really like the story about these poor kids who they have to deal with these awful parents that they're basically even a disgrace to their ancestors and descendants, and only that kind of like the eldest of the kids is the one that wants to show the greatness of the Willoughbys, but his parents are really awful. They're just kind of like too lovesick that they just eat each other's faces, but they basically hate their children so much that things could get a kind of like a turnaround after they find an orphan baby in which they drop him into this guy who is practically the Colonel Sanders of candy. And then they try to get rid of those parents by making them have to go kind of like a big around the world honeymoon with the hopes that they're gonna kill them. But of course they hired this babysitter who the babysitter does a great job on taking care of these children. But of course the elder, since he spent most of his life were being kind of like mistreated by not only the parents, but also because he also has to take the blunt of all the problems that the siblings causes. So he's technically kind of like distrustful the whole thing, and also doesn't help that since the children are technically locked up in that house, they're living kind of like a sick life that they don't know how's the outside world. And I really like how it goes on. I love the character. I love that they wanted to put a little bit more on the character of the babysitter, of why she is kind of like the most overly nice character there is. And it's not because she's basically Mary Poppins. I mean, she's not Mary Poppins. She doesn't even have the magic of Mary Poppins. But she is a character who also was an orphan, and she just decided that, well, I'm gonna dedicate my life making children have a good life and taking care of them. And of course, she sees that the Willoughby kids are actually kids that they really needed, and after having these disastrous parents, and yeah, there is kind of like a theme about trust, about what do you consider what is real family and everything. And I really like it that it doesn't go overall. It's kind of like the Disney route saying that, yeah, our blood family is everything. We have to cherish our parents, when sometimes parents are not worth it when they're like that. And also it does help that it has some great animation style. It's not exactly, it's cartoonish, but not, but appealingly cartoonish. And what else there is that I like? Oh yeah, I think that my favorite character are the twins. That they just I'm just saying that I like the twins a lot. But anyway, Willoughby's was enough for me to become my number 5 on my list. My number 4. You know what? Come to think of it. You know that one of the most prominent names of the colors of the Willoughbys is their hair color, kind of like this magenta color. Well, let's say that that it kind of connects with my number 4 movie, which is Color Out of Space. Whew. You know, and now that I think of it, speaking of that, it also connects with my list because this is another Nicolas Cage film. Color Out of Space, I don't know if it came out last year but I heard that this year it came out in limited movie theaters. But you know what? It counts, even though I saw it on a TV and everything. Besides, I needed something to fill in. I'm kind of like a sucker of Lovecraftian horror, and even the story of Color Out of Space, I have it here on the Call of Cthulhu and Other Weird Stories book. And before I did mention that before I saw the movie, I read the small story, and it was intriguing. I'm not saying that it's a masterpiece of a movie and also like a masterpiece of a story, but it is fresh enough and at the same time faithful enough to the adaptation to let you know that this is kind of like one of those stories which has some kind of Lovecraftian horror that if you're a fan of those, you're gonna get glued to that. Because basically it's kind of like it's the story of the downfall of this family after a meteorite falls near their garden, and then apparently because there's some radiation of this meteorite that gives out kind of like an undescribable but really odd color that anyone who is affected by this color, basically it turns their rage up, they become insane, they get kind of like merged. Lots of horrible Lovecraftian things happen that I'm not gonna exactly give you so much details, but in the case of the movie, they kind of expanded by having an update into modern times. We got Nicolas Cage raising an alpaca farm, which is basically kind of like the biggest thing that I remember about this movie is the gosh darn alpacas. And if you're not sold out on the film, I highly recommend you to watch because Nicolas Cage he cages the whole film when he becomes insane. So much that probably my favorite cageism on this movie is see him how he eats a raw tomato like. Oh my god. Funny enough that the biggest thing is alpacas and how to eat that tomato that I remember mostly about this film. Although, yeah, I know that it's kind of a little bit cheating saying that they're using this color magenta to describe, color out of space when in the book it describes it by something that is unrecognizable. But you know what? I give it a pass because this is kind of like a visual medium that you have to represent it somehow. But either way, I highly recommend Color Out of Space if you haven't seen it. For me, it is one of the better Lovecraftian horror movies that I have seen in a while. Alright, now we are on my top 3 of the best movies of the year. So what do I got on my third place? Third place is another Netflix movie but this one I saw it in Ecuador. I'm talking about the psychological horror His House. His house is kind of like an allegory to immigration. Not exactly centered on America, because this is a movie that is mostly centered on England. And it talks about people running away from the horrible life from Africa in a war-torn country, and then they seek refuge as, well, illegal immigrants in England. And when you think about that, this is kind of like a universal problem. It makes the movie kind of like a really sad watch, but honestly in a good way. And I like that the movie, well, is a little bit pretentious. It's not 100% preachy. It's actually more clever than you think of. In this case, it centers around this African couple who they run away from their war-torn country, and they were rescued from the sea by the British government, and they're given a chance to live out to take refuge there. But of course, they're given in this really awful dinky house. But they're like, that looks good. But unfortunately, we get to the psychological horror, in which it centers in both characters, in which we got, I forgot the names right now, but we got the male character who basically represents the kind of like the immigrant who goes into another country. He doesn't want to go back to where he originated. He wants to try out, he wants to adapt to the culture and the whole market, all the things that you can buy over there, making your kind of settle in and try to fit in this case with the British. But then we got, of course, the female protagonist who she basically is a little bit more sensible. She's having a lot of regrets about running away. She feels like the house is technically haunted by kind of like a witch spirit, and it is kind of creepy. And it's not jump out creepy. It's mostly technically is kind of to show off the insecurities and the horrors of what they left behind. And this kind of basically also clashes with the relationship of this couple. And of course there is the biggest crux in which basically during this whole ordeal they lose a daughter. She drowned at sea while trying to run away from everything. And basically that leaves a mar on their conscience, in which we got, of course, our male protagonist who is trying to forget about everything, but our female protagonist is like that, no, I can't forget and everything. This was actually one of the most clever films I have seen. And there is this big twist that I kind of wanted to see it coming, but I never expected that they did there. And for me, it would be a disservice to tell you what it is, but it's a great twist. So feel yourself good at home and watch His House when you get the chance. But there are other two movies that kind of surpass, in which they're not as super clever as there is, but let's say that my number two. Number two is going to be a surprise to many, because I doubt that the number two on the list is going to be on anyone's list. Why? Because this movie has no business to be on a top 10 if you're kind of like this big professional or something like that. And honestly, it's not a great film, but I couldn't help it. Because it is on many journalists' worst movies of this year, but not for me. My number 2 is Sonic the Hedgehog. How dare you put a video game movie especially high? How dare you? This movie sucks. How dare you? This movie is not great. Look, I know that there is a curse about video game films, but considering the year that we had, and considering the whole thing that this movie was going on, I had to give it merit, because this is as close as you can get from having a decent video game film. There are flaws, I understand, but yeah, you can put me on the bandwagon saying that you must be a Sonic fan. Okay, yes, I am. I'm a Sonic fan. I love Sonic. And this movie, and I've seen a lot of video game movies that I've seen on the big screen, and every time I'm like, oh my god, they did it. This one was the least groaning-inducing film I have seen. Of course, that there are some things that I would have appreciated. For example, if only they could have get rid of James Marsden, because this guy has no business in this movie. And also, I didn't like what was it, this big mama sister like character that she's like the kind of without any offense, she kind of like this typical oh hell no, I don't want you, this kind of African American person. She gets on my nerves, but luckily she wasn't too much into the movie. But it kind of did its own thing with Sonic. I really liked how he looks, especially after the disastrous first screening of the trailer, in which the model looked awful. And funnily enough, I didn't have faith on Jim Carrey as Dr. Robotnik, but he didn't warm me up until, of course, at the end it's like, now that's the Dr. Eggman I know. So I had a lot of fun with this film. Even the James Marsden thing, I kind of brush it out. It was just fun. And considering that it was one of the few films that actually listened to fans, I had to give it credit and put it higher, because there's not every movie managed to listen to people who are more devoted to the franchise than any filmmaker and work as a team instead of having the pompous elitist way and saying that this is my vision, I do whatever I want. And you know what? I'm really eager to see the sequel. I hope that the sequel technically fill out some of the plot holes that the film has. But overall, this was a fun film, and I can't believe that it's on many worst films of the year. Because worst films is not. Worst video game movie is not. I've seen worse. And this one comes as decent enough that for a video game film, I had to give it at least a second place. But then came out one movie. One movie I fell in love. And it's another animated film. An animated film that it was enough for me to give it my #1 spot. I didn't even need to read it. My #1 best movie of the year is Wolfwalkers. Cartoon Saloon, it was always on my radar ever since I watched their first animated series, Kung Fu, and from there I saw it grow from Secret of Kells, Song of the Sea, and now I haven't seen Breadwinner. I'm probably gonna watch it sometime. And now I've seen Wolfwalkers, who feels like every single film of Cartoon Saloon is really ambitious on its art style. And it shows that there's a lot of passion and work that I personally think that these guys work harder compared to a 3D film like Pixar. Although, don't get me wrong, I know that 3D films like Pixar take years in the making. But this one, it feels like a painting coming back to life. And also there's this wonderful story of friendship between a wannabe hunter girl with a wolf girl. The movie technically is kind of like a British werewolf in Ireland. There is also the theme about her overprotective father, who, despite that he is big and strong and brave, he also is really vulnerable when it's about the orthodoxy or about the law, the superior, so much that he can't even shoot an arrow to basically the bad guy who basically, while looking a little bit like a generic bad guy, he also has some layers that he's too devoted to the religion that there is. But aside from that, and aside from the wonderful animation, there's a lovely music, a great soundtrack. There's a lot of heart on the characters. So much that this is one of those few films that I actually tear up a little bit when the movie ended. It's a movie that, again, I really, really wish to see it on the big screen. Actually, I saw a video saying that some Warner Brothers producer said that 2D cartoons should not be watched, on the big screen because you lose some kind of focus or something like that. I don't remember much. I do disagree. We need more 2D films to watch, especially when it lets you be immersed in a world like this one. So, without spoiling much, I have to stop right now. I highly recommend you Wolfwalkers if you haven't watched it. It was enough for me to become my #1 best movie of the year. And that was something that I needed, especially considering that of the hectic kind of year that we're facing. So, yeah. That's my top 10 best movie of 2020. Let's just hope that next year we're gonna get to see more good movies, like I did this year. I feel hopeful. But of course, whenever there's hope, there's despair. Because I did say that I didn't saw too many good movies. I wasn't lying about that.